Hello, everybody. Welcome. Yes, this week we are going to be talking about you and your emotions. So don't get in your feelings. That's right. This week we're going to be talking about emotional intelligence. Now, I'm sure this is a term that you've heard many times before. Some people refer to it as EI. It was around since about the 1900s, and it was popularized by someone by the name of Daniel Goleman in his book titled Emotional Intelligence. Now, generally speaking, we like to say that emotional intelligence is that ability to really understand your emotions, how people perceive you, how you're showing up in the world, and the ability to take that information and behave appropriately given any situation. Wouldn't we all like to do that, right? It means that you have an awareness of how people view you again, how you're showing up in the world. Are you that toxic coworker that everybody hates to be around? Or are you that pleasant coworker that people come to for maybe support and a resource of information? How are you showing up in the world? Well, we're all good at pointing out other people's shortcomings, and emotional intelligence is also about your perspective on how other people are also showing up in the world, and then using this awareness to manage and handle interpersonal relationships and sort of move and navigate through the world around you. Now, don't let the word intelligence fool you or scare you or anything like that. Your emotional intelligence, it's not an innate ability or a fixed trait that can be altered. You're not born with this really super high emotional intelligence, and you're not born with a really super low emotional. Well, I beg to differ, from the research. I believe some people are just born with low emotional intelligence, from my personal experience. But emotional intelligence, it is something that can be learned and developed over time, and it does take effort, it does take practice, and it's built through a bit of self-reflection, being honest with yourself, and by not being dismissive of other people's emotions. So let's jump right in. How do our emotions impact our lives, you ask? Well, I'm glad you asked that question. Your emotions impact every single thing that you do in your personal and professional lives, whether you work from home and you're having virtual interactions or you're having face-to-face interactions. Your emotions play a huge role. They play a role in life satisfaction, personal and professional. Again, they also play a role in your psychological health and your mood. Have you ever noticed that coworker that everyone tries to avoid because she is just so moody and I don't want to deal with that? Well, she's just not in touch with, her emotions, and is not aware of how her emotions are affecting how she's showing up in the world. Your emotions are a deciding factor when it comes to how you process information and how we make decisions, and they dictate even our behavior and how our behavior affects others. And one critical factor is that our emotions affect how we solve problems, conflict resolution. Yes, your emotions affect how well you can solve problems and manage stress. The bottom line is, it doesn't matter who you are or what your role is, whether you are a CEO or a janitor, we are all human, and that means we are subject to emotions. That's right. We are all impacted by our emotions. Through emotional intelligence and understanding of our emotions, we can find better ways to be leaders, whether it is in our homes as parents or spouses, or in the workplace as managers, supervisors, and CEOs. We can all improve our lives through a better understanding and awareness of our emotions. So Socrates is known for this really cool quote. He said it in 5th century BC, and it's really simple. It states, "Know thyself." But the truth is, how many of us receive information in our upbringing or our education, for that matter, on how to be more self-aware? We don't, right? However, recognizing our feelings is a foundational skill for personal growth, interpersonal development, as well as improved communication. Get ready for some honest self-reflection, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So a really wise philosopher once asked the question, "How you doing?" I'm just kidding. That's Wendy Williams, the famous talk show host. But it's a really simple question. And honestly, this question rarely gets asked in the workplace. It rarely gets asked in our personal lives. And if it does get asked, it's to the point that somebody has done something so extreme, we're not asking how they're doing. We're kind of asking in a sense like, are you okay? Are you about to like go crazy, in the workplace? They've already done something so extreme. We have to get in the habit of not only checking in with people that we work with in our workplace, we have to check in with people in our personal lives. We have to check in with ourselves. The director of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence states that if we are not able to identify our emotions, if we're not conscious of our emotions, then we're at their mercy. And isn't that the truth? Because our emotions can dictate our behavior for better or for worse. And, the next time that you're feeling irritable, I want you to think about the stressors that contributed to that feeling of irritability. Did your barista get your coffee wrong, this morning at the coffee shop? Was it the traffic that's got you irritable, being stuck in traffic on your way to work? Or could it possibly be that you didn't get enough sleep? Because when we're able to identify our feelings and the sources of our feelings, then we're better able to stay in control of them and diffuse any situations that could arise when a situation comes our way. And when we get in the habit of doing this, we're less likely to snap at our children. We're less likely to fight with our coworkers at work. It is this self-awareness, and it has meaningful consequences that impact our professional and personal relationships on a day-to-day basis, as well as our overall health and well-being. So there are a number of ways in which one can become more adept in recognizing your feelings. The physiological changes is first, okay? So listen, physiological changes can be a clear indicator of your emotional state or that your emotional state is off, okay? For example, let's say that you're under a deadline at work to get a project in. So this increased stress can result in a physiological changes such as changes in your circulation, increased blood pressure, increased heart rate, increase in the stress hormone cortisol, which we hate because that makes us gain weight. All of these are physiological changes that indicate, listen, hello, your body is telling you you are under too much stress. You're not maybe perhaps getting enough sleep. You're not exercising enough. Psychological changes, they are the key to letting us know that something's off with our body, and our emotions are the signals, so don't ignore them. Another thing that we can do to recognize our emotions are nonverbal behaviors. It's a great way to stay connected to how we're feeling. So nonverbal cues, such as if you are a generally cool, calm person and then you start to get frustrated in conversations, or people start to agitate you, and all of a sudden when you're talking, you're like tapping your fingers, you're doing, your eyes start to move, rapidly. You're in a meeting and you get up and you have to go outside and pace, right? Those are all nonverbal signals that your emotions are trying to tell you something through your nonverbal body signals. Also, if it escalates, some other examples that these include nonverbal aggression. So if it escalates to aggression, this could include, violent physical gestures. And this would mostly happen in the home, where most people can't see. Violent physical gestures, such as slapping or shoving. You might even launch an object or throw something. I don't know. It could happen in your workplace. I don't know. Or you start to throw things, or you start to use, weapons or blunt instruments, and it escalates. And then, at that time, you really need to really seek help because you're out of control of your emotions. And then finally, monitoring your thought process and your language is a really great way to recognize our emotions. Are there changes in your demeanor? Are there changes in your voice? Are there changes in your verbal expression? It's important that you recognize all of these things in yourself. And we also need to be able to recognize those things in others, especially in our homes and especially in our workplace. So research suggests that people who are more aware of their own emotional states make better decisions because they use that awareness in critical decision-making processes. For example, if you're doing company bonuses and you're in a really bad mood, you might step back and say, hey, I'm in a bad mood. Let me not do bonuses, today. Let me do it at another time when I'm feeling a little bit more objective, because otherwise everybody might just get like $1.50 for their Christmas bonus, and then they'll be really upset. Another valuable trait that includes in being emotionally aware is positive relationships. People that are aware of their emotions, relationships are lit, and not just generalized relationships, the relationships that matter, like parent-child relationships, spousal relationships, and they have really strong friendships. It's also important to note that people who are more adept at recognizing their feelings, they have a greater ability to comfort others. So in order for me to comfort you, I need to recognize something in you that I've already recognized in myself to make a connection. Does that make sense? It's called empathy. So people with greater emotional awareness have greater connections and greater empathy in their relationships. And then finally, not finally, two more. People with emotional intelligence have greater awareness and a greater sensitivity to nonverbal cues. Now, for example, this would be useful if you were doing a sales presentation and you notice that the client was disengaged. They are not making eye contact. They're kind of leaning back from you. They're not like engaged and leaning up, wanting to hear more. They're distracted. Maybe they bust out their phone and they're being super rude. You can pick up on these things, these nonverbal cues, and you can redirect your sales presentation to re-engage the client. Make sense? Yes. And then finally, people who are more emotionally aware, they have better sense of humor, right? Wouldn't we all like to work with people with a great sense of humor? I certainly would. So being aware of our own feelings, it's an invaluable ingredient for skillful communication in our personal and professional lives. So how do we get better at emotional intelligence? We can improve our emotional vocabularies. As human beings, we typically stay in a very narrow vocabulary when it comes to our day-to-day interactions. We typically will give one-word responses when we're feeling so many things at any given moment. And let me give you an example, and a good example. And I think that social media, yes, social media has a lot to do with it because it conditions us to be one-dimensional. You give a picture, I'm happy here at work, I'm happy at home, I'm happy in my relationship. You're just happy, happy, happy all the time, and nobody is happy all the time, right? The truth is that we actually reveal things face to face and on social media that have no relevant emotional content. And this is what communication scholars call counterfeit. You are emotionally counterfeit. That's the term that we use. So developing and using different shades of emotions and descriptors help us to better create our reality, and it helps people to better understand us. For example, let me give you an example. If you're in a relationship and your partner says, "We've been seeing too much of each other," this statement reveals absolutely no emotional content. It's really a thought, and it does reveal intent, but and girl, he's about to break up with you, by the way, if he says that, but it doesn't really reveal any emotional content. Versus if your partner says, we've been seeing too much of each other and I feel suffocated, right? That reveals everything. Okay, maybe I've been calling him too much. Maybe I've been, asking too much of him, etc., etc. That gives you a little something to work with, right? So the next time you're in an argument, don't just say, something like, "I really resent you." You can instead say like, "I resent you when you look at your cell phone when I'm talking to you because I feel ignored." Ooh, that's good. That gives them a lot more to work with. Okay, our words, our vocabulary gives people things to work with, and they help us to be understood, and they help us to get our communication goals met. So we want to use descriptive language. We want to use concrete language. Check out my lecture on language if you get time and you want more information on that. We want to use powerful single word phrases, and we want to use granularity or more smaller details to enhance and color our language. Make sense? Good. Okay. Now, people that use expanded emotional vocabulary, they're healthier. You know why? They go to the doctor less. This is probably because their language helped them to target health problems as well as potential risks before they start. So start expanding your vocabulary It'll be good for your health. Now, next up, let's talk about accountability. So taking accountability for your emotions means that you accept responsibility for the way you feel. And this one is big because, people are always trying to say, well, you make me feel this way, or you're the reason why I dislike work, or you are not responsible for anybody else's emotions but your own. You are not, because if somebody can get you to be responsible for their emotions, then they can get you responsible for their actions and their behaviors. And you are never responsible for anybody else's behaviors or actions. It is important to make sure that your emotional expressions don't blame others for the way that you feel. So, for example, I love examples. Instead of saying, you're making me angry, a more accurate statement would be to say, I'm feeling angry, or saying, you hurt my feelings. Instead of saying my feelings are hurt, you can say, at the meeting last week when Sarah said X, Y, and Z, I felt hurt. So it's basically taking responsibility, taking accountability for the way that you feel, because you're the only person that is in charge of your emotions. And I wish I could just really just hammer in on this point, because we live in a day and age where people make make others responsible for the way that they feel, and nobody can make you feel a certain way. No one can make you feel inferior. No one can make you feel unintelligent. No one can make you feel any kind of debilitative emotion. You are in control of your emotions. Okay? Now, moving on. So in my fantastic courses, you have learned how to identify your feelings, right? A little bit, right? So far, I hope you have. Now, just because you have learned to identify your feelings, such as anger, doesn't mean that you should go out and automatically act on it, okay? Just not yet, not yet, not yet, right? There's a pretty compelling body of research that shows that people that actually act out on their anger end up feeling worse. And don't get any ideas about expressing how you feel online or via social media, because, posting a rant or a frustration and then taking it down, because research says that doesn't help either. Venting your feelings indiscriminately actually increases levels of anxiety in your work life, your personal life, all your interpersonal relationships, okay? So there's a connection between recognizing your emotions and acting, and there's a way to act out appropriately and find an appropriate course of action. So for example, I love examples. You have a job interview coming up, and you start to recognize that you are feeling nervous, right? Now, you don't want to automatically just cancel the interview. You don't want to ignore how you're feeling. So you want to you recognize your feelings, and the next thing to do is work to remedy the problem. Review your resume. Make sure that the job position that you're applying for is right for you. Make sure you didn't lie on the job application, okay? And then prepare. You never ever want to ignore your feelings. You never ever want to, because actually our feelings reveal to us things that we should pay attention to. They're signals. And in order to make the best chances of success, we want to acknowledge our emotions and act appropriately. Now, another way that we can get better at emotional intelligence is by fully expressing ourselves. And you might say, hey, I have no problem expressing myself. I have no problem, telling people off. I have no problem giving people a piece of my mind. And that's really not what I'm talking about here. The key here is that the feelings that you do express, they might be expressed too late, or they might not be the only ones that you're experiencing. Now, let's give an example, because I love examples. A friend posts a picture on you of a good time that you had this past weekend on social media. Ooh, yes. Now, you express to your friend, I'm really disappointed that you would do that. In this situation, you're probably feeling several emotions, but you only expressed one. What is it? Disappointment. You're also embarrassed because some of your coworkers go on her page and can see that picture. You're angry because she did it without asking. You feel violated. You don't know if you can trust this person. You're feeling all of these different emotions, right? And for example, if you're the type of person that you often express maybe the emotion disappointment. But you also feel anger, but you don't address that anger. You might also feel frustration, but you don't express the emotions that accompany the disappointment. This happens in marriages all the time. The argument is never, this is how we fall into communication patterns of using single word phrases, and the argument is never about the argument. It is the accompanying emotions that will get you, that are not expressed, that will get you into trouble. And again, like I said, this happens in intimate romantic relationships all the time. This happens at work as well. If the people in our relationships understood the extent of our feelings about particular subjects, and we expressed ourselves better, then we would probably get more satisfying reactions. Being able to fully express yourselves and your emotions brings more satisfying relationships because you get more satisfying outcomes. Not all of our emotions are beneficial. Depression, anxiety, guilt. These are not emotions that are going to help you in any way. They're not going to help improve your relationships. They're not going to help you become a better communicator. And it's important to distinguish whether our emotions are facilitative, whether they're contributing to the effectiveness of us as human beings, or whether they're debilitative, whether they're hindering or preventing you from performing at optimal levels, right? And the secret to managing our emotions is to manage our thought process. What are you thinking about consistently? How is it influencing your behavior? Because in order to change your feelings, we have to change unproductive cognitive interpretations. And those are big words. Let me break it down for you. In lay terms, that means you have to turn off the negative recording that is on replay in your mind. Okay? And that is how, in communication terms, we call that self-talk. And taking control, taking authority over the negative self-talk is how you really take control and improve your interpersonal communication. Okay, guys, let's go a little bit deeper. Our life experiences carry messages with them, and those messages run deep. Whether you came from a really great childhood home and you received positive messages, or you came from a not so great home like many of us and you receive negative messaging, it is the extent that you place belief in these messages that they affect your thinking and they affect your behavior. So understanding this process and the power of negative self-talk is really essential in understanding your emotions and how your emotions interfere with your growth, your development, and your goal attainment. Okay? Basically, in lay terms, it comes from accepting lies that you've been told. It comes from accepting lies that you've been sold. So, and the crazy thing is that most of us, we are unaware of the root of our negative thinking, and we're unaware of our negative thought process. We're just unaware that we speak negatively to ourselves, and that makes it incredibly dangerous and incredibly powerful. So let's take a look at some of the ways that our negative thinking harms us. Let's first start with perfectionism. Now, we live in a selfie society, so I am going to blame social media because many of us have been conditioned to present a one-dimensional part of our lives. Life is not perfect, okay? But we are conditioned to believe that we should handle every situation with complete confidence and with a mastery of skill set, and that's just not reality. It is unrealistic to expect that you can reach or maintain that level of behavior. Y'all, it's a social media fantasy, okay? That is what it is. And we have to, as a society, let go of perfectionism in our thinking. And that means being able to make mistakes. That means when you're on the job, being able to say, I don't know, and ask for help. I can't tell you how many people that I've seen fumble through presentations or fumble through work product. And if they would just stop and say, you know what, I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know the answer. Then they could really get the help that they need. So we need to be able to make mistakes, and we need to be able to say, I don't know. We need to be able to share feelings of discomfort or feelings of uncertainty. You guys, these are not social defects. We can reframe perfectionist thinking by saying, Instead of saying, you know what, I made a mistake, I am a complete loser, I'm not qualified, you can reframe that by saying, I made a mistake and I am going to take this as an opportunity to grow. The next thing that I want to talk about is a thought process that causes really powerless emotions, and that is the desire to be wholeheartedly liked and approved by others. And again, I am going to shift a little bit of the blame to this social media generation. As an example, on our pages and social media, we want to be liked. We do not like negative comments. If we get too many negative comments, we are severely negatively affected by it, according to the research. And that is a fallacy, because it puts your self-esteem in other people's hands, and it programs you to look outside of yourself for affirmation. Listen, you need to affirm yourself. You need to like yourself. You need to approve yourself. Never seek to obtain everybody's approval, okay? If you do, you're going to end up sacrificing your own happiness. You are going to end up sacrificing your own principles. Yes, don't get me wrong. It is important to consider the needs of others, but it is more important to strive for their respect. Do not ever abandon your own principles to gain the acceptance of others. Okay, moving on. We have a lot to cover on this slide. The next type of thinking that I want to address is should thinking. I should be a better daughter. I should be a better parent. And even if it is true, maybe you should be a better husband, these types of should statements generate a lot of emotional baggage. And if you do it to yourself, there's a pretty good possibility that you're going to put that baggage on others and direct that type of thinking towards others. And this creates very unrealistic expectations that are often going to leave you feeling disappointed. So when it comes to the should thinking and self-imposed resolutions and being hypercritical of yourself, stop it, stop it, stop it. Goal set and level up. Okay. The next type of thinking that I want to address is how we make these grand overgeneralizations, right? We base our belief system on, and our words and our thinking on, a limited amount of evidence. And this causes us to focus on one single shortcoming about ourselves, as if it represents the whole picture of who we are. And I'll give you an example. I love examples. Let's say you failed a test. I failed a test this week. Man, I'm such a failure. Now stop right there, okay? You could be thinking it or saying it. Let's take a step back and look at the whole picture. You could say, man, I failed my test this week, but I had to work 40 hours. I'm caring for my aging parents. Shoot, I got my own kids that I have to care for. I'm just very busy. The truth is that you are not a failure just because you failed. The truth is you need better time management skills because you have a lot on your plate, okay? Does that make sense? So the more accurate messages that we're able to send to ourselves, then the less negative emotions that we're going to feel. Okay, moving on, we have thoughts that I call them helpless. I call it helpless thinking. We have thoughts that reinforce the idea that we're victims. For example, if I could say, God, I'm just a black woman trying to survive in America. I'm black and I'm a woman. There's no way that I'm going to get ahead in society. So that's just the way it is. And I'm just going to accept it. That is not true, right? Um, that's not true. And once you realize that that helpless thinking leads to a path of nowhere. That's the problem with helpless thinking. It leaves you where you are with no choices, okay? Cognitively, it gives you no choices. And so behaviorally, you're not going to do anything. So it leads to a path to nowhere. So you don't use helpless thinking. Change your self-talk and open your eyes to choices, because once you have choices, it motivates you to feel positive about pursuing those choices. The truth is, you are in control of your life satisfaction, regardless of your circumstances or your environment. Ultimately, you are in control of your life, your purpose, your destiny. It is not in anyone else's hands, okay? Next, I want to talk about how your thinking sets your expectations, okay? And this is related to people that think negatively all the time. Your thinking literally creates your reality. Your language, what you think is what you're going to say, and your language creates your reality. If for more information on this, I have a lecture on language, so you can check that out. But I'm not going to go really too much into this, but if you're speaking negatively, with negative expectations, there is a self-fulfilling prophecy behind that, that you set in motion with your words. So it does take practice, but train your mind to operate on the assumption that you're going to expect the best, and you're going to start to begin to reshape your reality. Okay, and the last thing that I want to talk about is causation. Okay, and this is really, really big because we live in a society where people try to make other people responsible for their lives, responsible for the way that they feel, responsible for their emotions, and there's no accountability. A lot of people have this mindset that they are God and that they are responsible for other people's lives and other people's emotions. And this is simply not true. Okay. And this is a big one. If you do this a lot, this probably came from conditioning in childhood where you were set to look outside yourself instead of looking inward towards yourself for caring too much about other people's feelings at the sacrifice of exercising your own agency. Okay, if you are guilty of this, you are a person that avoids bringing up issues with your friends in your relationships, right? You're an avoider in conflict resolution. You avoid it, right? And if you're always avoiding stuff, you become a doormat and you don't get your needs met. If you are at work and you do this, you also don't do very well in the workplace because you're afraid of causing a negative reaction. And this is a result of assuming that you're in charge of another person's behaviors and emotions. So, for example, let me give you an example. You may say, you know what? Sarah made me so angry in the meeting last week. Well, did everybody get angry? Because people respond differently to the exact same behavior. Someone who, for example, may have, you know, we get angry in these streets in America. So someone who may have road rage and they might scream, "You idiot," as you're driving by. One person is going to ignore it. Another person is going to respond in a nonverbal manner that's not so polite. And another person might pull over and say, "Hey, we got a problem," right? So your response is determined by your own temperament and your own thinking. Now, yes, we live in a crazy society. People act out in all kinds of ways that can be provocative. That is a given. However, let me state this very clearly. Everybody is responsible for their own actions, because if people can make you responsible for their emotions, then they will make you responsible for their behavior and their actions, and that is just not okay. A person's reaction and actions are determined by their own temperament, their own thinking, and we have to learn to take ownership for our emotions, the way that we feel, our individual actions and reactions. And these are really great ways that you can empower your own thinking. Being able to identify and anticipate emotional pitfalls or things that are going to trigger you to start thinking negatively, that's going to trigger that negative record to start playing in your mind, can help you develop the in the moment awareness. When we're interacting with somebody and we feel like they're about to trigger us to start being down on ourselves, or a situation is going to trigger our anxiety or depression, you can take a mental pause and you can just sit in the moment and realize what is happening, why it's happening, and then you can respond appropriately in a way that is constructive and helpful. Being able to do this is not only going to improve your self-talk, it's going to make you more professional, more influential, and more effective in your personal life, in your professional life. And it also helps prevent from having to go back and apologize for blowing up on people, for, misinterpreting things. Because remember, you can't go and, you can't take back something once it's said. And it's important to reflect on what behaviors that you have been currently displaying at home and in the workplace. These behaviors, the way that you act, the way that you show up, impacts other people, how they view you, right? You don't want to be the person like, "Oh, here comes crazy." You don't want to be that person. You don't want to be that person at home. You don't want to be that person at work. You really don't want to be that person at work, right? People draw conclusions from your behavior, and they treat you accordingly based on those conclusions. Let me say that again. People draw conclusions and perceptions about you based on your behavior, for better or for worse. So being aware of your emotions and how they influence, what you're doing physically, emotionally, and behaviorally in the moment allow you to make choices about, how to act and interact with your children, your coworkers, your spouse in your personal and professional life. And this awareness can really empower you to stop reacting with an automatic response. So instead of blowing up, or instead of, being a doormat and letting people walk over you, try something different. Turn the situation around by consciously choosing to engage more effectively. Okay, guys, so the holidays are coming up. So let's talk real world scenario where you can apply some of the things that we've discussed today. So imagine that you are at Thanksgiving dinner. Now, a week ago, you had a conversation with your aunt. Your relationship is a little bit, chippy, to say the least. And the last conversation that you had with her, at the end of the conversation, she hung up on you. Yes, she did. Okay, so you didn't expect to see her on this Thanksgiving day, and she walks through the door. For whatever reason, you begin to get really angry, and you notice that you are triggered. You feel your heart starts to pound, you start to fidget, okay, you start to get irritable, you start, craving macaroni and cheese, okay? What do you do in this situation? Perhaps you decided to get up and go to a different room, or you decided that you're just going to ignore her. She is not going to ruin your dressing and your stuffing and cranberries or whatever you eat. Okay? And you decide you're going to focus on food and just eating a lot this year for Thanksgiving. Maybe a third option is that you decide to push your feelings down and you act like everything is all good, which is a mature response. So these reactions represent our typical responses to triggers. One, avoiding the situation or just simply, ignoring it. The problem with this approach is that the situation is still there. Your aunt is still there with her negative attitude. It's just waiting to pop off, okay? So the situation goes unaddressed, but it's still there. Two, suppressing or pushing down your emotions that you're feeling. And that's the worst thing that you can do because it's really bad for your health. And those emotions, you push them down, but you push them down and they're what? Still in your body, okay? And research has shown that the long-term impact of suppressing negative emotions can result in all kinds of health complications. It puts physical stress on your body. It impacts your heart health, your immune system, your mental health, okay? So there's a healthy third option in a way that you can respond, and that is reframing your thinking. And in communication terms, we call that cognitive reappraisal. And this involves reframing the situation and looking at it from another perspective. When you are triggered and you're in the moment, cognitive reappraisal is a really great strategy that you can have to avoid suppressing emotions and avoid, making yourself sick over other people. So cognitive reappraisal basically means that you recognize the emotions that you're feeling. You name it, like, ooh, she just walked in. I don't like her. I'm angry, right? But you stop that negative feedback loop by changing the pattern of your thinking into something more positive and effective. So you could say, you know what? Consider a different perspective that I could have in this situation. Perhaps my aunt is going through something that I don't know about, and that's why, she was so chippy with me on the phone last week. Perhaps an emergency happened and that I don't know about that she doesn't want to share, and, maybe that's why she hung up. Or perhaps it has absolutely nothing in me and she is experiencing something at work, a work emergency, but whatever it is, I'm just going to assume that it's not completely about me. You want to consider some alternative explanations and go with that. Now, probably just considering another perspective can really loosen the initial negative emotions, and it can bring up different emotions and perspectives that help us regain control of our emotions, such as anger. And you're going to start to feel more balanced. You can have, a great interaction with other people at the Thanksgiving dinner, because the alternative is you go up to your aunt and you confront her, and then you guys start to fighting, and you knock over the Thanksgiving turkey, and the cranberry sauce gets ruined and you get it in your hair, and Nana is there and Nana's heart rate is rushing. The kids are crying. Don't ruin Thanksgiving. Consider choosing a time to express your feelings in a way that timing is everything, right? So you might want to consider a better time to express your feelings. Even after you've waited for your initial emotions to subside, you might want to postpone confrontation and find another time to express your emotions when the recipient is ready to hear you. So conflict resolution is not all about you. You have to take into consideration if the other person is going to want to hear you. And here's a tip that I haven't mentioned. Consider letting it go. Not stuffing down the emotions, but literally letting the emotions go, letting the offense go, and literally mentally, cognitively forgiving that person. Choose to forego the battle for the sake of peace of mind, because your peace of mind is priceless. I don't let anybody affect my peace anymore. And when you start to experience, because the holidays are coming up, when you start to experience these really strong emotions, write out your feelings. This is a tip. This is a free one. Write out your feelings. Your feelings and your thoughts. It's been doing this has been shown to have mental, physical, and emotional benefits. And once again, what I'm doing here is I'm highlighting the therapeutic link between emotion, your cognitive process, and communication. This process of turning your feelings into language can be beneficial in managing your emotions in a more helpful way. If what you have been doing has been working for you, that's great. Build upon it. If it has not been working for you, consider some of these examples. Don't ruin Thanksgiving for the kids, okay? This wonderful quote from Daniel Goleman really gets to the heart of EI. The range of what we think and do is limited by what we fail to notice. If you don't acknowledge something or notice something, then you can't change it. We want to, in summary, develop an awareness of your own emotional responses and the responses of others. And that means if you feel yourself starting to become angry, starting to become anxious, or you feel someone else starting to become emotionally heated, pause, take notice of what's going on within yourself and the other person, and do this without judgment and without putting your own spin on things, without putting your own interpretation on things. Also, take accountability. I can't stress this enough. Take responsibility for your own emotions, your own actions and reactions. Remember, someone can say the one thing to the same group of people, and everyone, based on their own temperament and their own perspective, is going to react in a different way. So consider, and this takes being honest with yourself, consider what role that you play in your day-to-day interactions. If you're constantly getting into it with people, if you're constantly popping off at people, what role are you playing? How are you affecting the dynamics of the chaos that's going on in your life? You're the contributing factor. Consider that. No one else will tell you that, but I will tell you that, okay? What are your behaviors, your responses, and your thoughts? Are they helpful? Are they healthy? You're going to have to answer those questions in an honest and real way. And put this awareness, this wonderful self-awareness that you have acquired, and this accountability that you have acquired, put it into practice, okay? Don't just hear about it. Execute, execute, execute. What can you change? How can you continue to move forward in a more positive and healthy way? So guys, in wrapping up, I want you to remember a few key points. So first, self-awareness and developing your emotional intelligence, that begins with you. It's all about you, okay? So begin to know yourself. Know what makes you happy and what makes you smile and what you enjoy doing. Understand what pisses you off as well. Understand, what your triggers are. And it's okay to say, you know what, this is an area for growth for me. I'm working on me. I'm working on myself. That's okay, you know? And remember, the second thing is to reframe the situation, cognitively reframe the situation, because if you look at things from a different perspective, then that will decrease a lot of the initial strong waves of emotion that you feel, and this will really provide that balance in viewing a situation and balance in your reaction to a situation. The last thing is I want you guys to remember empathy, 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 compassion, compassion, compassion. We do not know how to disagree. We really don't know how to interact with one another as human beings anymore. So self-awareness does take practice, but if you're more mindful, it can become automatic and really more natural. And you can do this by doing small things like paying attention to your breathing. And this really trains your mind to observe what's happening to your emotions rather than just being swept away by your emotions. Another key factor is to remember that it is not all about you, okay? We live in a world with billions of other human beings that are not you. It's not all about you. And that is where empathy comes in. Because in order for us to have empathy, we must connect with something in another person that we have recognized in ourselves. So we have to have self-compassion. That starts with self-compassion and self-awareness in order to show compassion and empathy to others. Now, other people are going to have varying degrees of emotional intelligence. And that means that you need to be able to perceive other people's emotions as well and make room for them and adjust your interpersonal communication accordingly. That takes maturity and effort. Conflict in this world is inevitable. Again, you can turn on the TV, people are fighting all over the place. We are fighting in the political arena, we are fighting in our school district meetings. You know, I see fighting in the school pickup line when I go to pick up my son. So conflict is inevitable, and we have to be able to navigate in a healthy way varying degrees of human interaction. Okay, this requires us to be aware of our own emotions and to behave in a way that takes both into account. Remember, people are like icebergs. And I'll tell you a quick story. When I first started lecturing, I had this mentor that came in to kind of watch me, and he was so mean and so rude, and I thought he was a little bit disrespectful, but okay. So fast forward to the end of the meeting, and he's like, man, my son has cerebral palsy. He has had 30 surgeries, and I just really am concerned with him. I'm not making enough money. I'm trying to actually get out of this profession. I was like, oh, that makes sense. So people often have a lot of things going on that have nothing to do with you. So again, reframing your thinking and leaving your mind open to different ways of thinking and different perspectives. Okay, there's always something going on below the surface. So seek to understand, for example, if you are a parent, seek to understand what your children are going through. If you're an employer, a business owner, seek to understand what your employees might be going through at any given moment. And the point is, show compassion for other people's well-being. And in doing this, this will promote a kind of inner self-humility and help us to understand and acknowledge our own shortcomings. We all have shortcomings. So if you take nothing else, remember, empathy is truly our secret weapon. Here are some quick references. Well, that's all I got for you guys today. This has been my lecture on emotional intelligence. I'm Professor Herron. It's been a privilege to work with you today.